legal process. We also have Jodeen on your screen. Jodeen is an arguing student here at the firm, and she is one of our newest members. And despite her relatively short time with us, she's already gained valuable experience across both collaborative and litigation files. Her legal journey began at Queen's University, where she honed her advocacy skills through roles at Neighborhood Legal Services Legal Clinic, as well as the Family and Children's Services of Frontenac Lennox in Addington. And these experiences have helped her develop a keen ability to navigate complex legal issues with empathy and insight. Outside of work, Jodine enjoys trying new and exciting activities, the most being ultimate frisbee. But now that there's snow, so I don't know if you'll be engaging in so much ultimate frisbee. And then,
There's indoor. There's
okay,
indoor
okay,
ultimate. Yeah.
all right. I thought it was just played on the field, but good to know, good to know. Um, Last but not least is myself. I am a compassionate family lawyer who's driven by a deep desire to support families through challenging times. With a background in commerce as well, I bring strong negotiation, analytical, and critical thinking skills to my legal practice. And during my articling period, I gained confidence in handling a wide range of family law matters, and I emphasize active listening, clear communication, and empathy, fostering a comfortable environment for clients. I am certified as a collaborative lawyer with the Ontario Association of Collaborative Professionals, and thus I offer clients an alternative dispute resolution approach to avoid court. Outside of work, I'm a dedicated Toronto Maple Leafs fan. Went to the game last night. They won. It was amazing. As well as an LA Rams fan. And I enjoy playing hockey and watching comedy movies. So with that, let us begin. Um, Jodine, financial obligations, debt. How are these two topics considered during separation?
Thank you. Yes, Phil. So when a marriage ends, sorting out finances can be really overwhelming, especially when it comes to debt. So I'll be talking about two important topics, understanding the difference between joint as well as individual debt and how financial obligations can be treated during separation. So in Ontario, marriage doesn't mean that you automatically take on your spouse's debt. If, let's say, you have a credit card or a loan in your name, it's usually your responsibility unless there's something, some agreement between you guys that says otherwise. Um, but during separation, things get really complicated as we try to figure out how to divide what was gain or loss during the marriage. So that's what I'm going to start with talking about equalization, because I think that's important to understand how debt plays a role in the separation process. So equalization is a process that calculates each spouse's net family property, so NFP for short. So you can think of this as like your net worth. When determining whether a debt is joint or individual, and sorry. So it's important to do this because you need to be able to determine whether a debt is joint or individual when it occurred, and then that can also make a big difference in how things, get sorted out afterwards. So let's briefly look at these concepts. So as mentioned before, it in a marriage, it doesn't mean that you're automatically responsible for your spouse's debt. Each person is liable for their own debt in their own name, but how debt is treated can depend on who incurs it. Um, so so when you marry, um, you each automatically get entitled to an equal share of the profits of your marriage. But this also means that when the marriage dissolves, each partner then becomes entitled to one half of the value of the property accumulated during the marriage. So, in order to calculate that value, we have to determine the party's net worth at the date of marriage, or cohabitation, whichever one comes first, and also the date of separation. And in order to do that, you have to subtract uh, your your debts from your assets. So usually, um, Usually, the when someone is entitled to an equalization payment, that is when a spouse's net NFP is higher than the other. That's called an equalization payment. That would mean that it kind of it what it does is it balances the value of the spouse's net family property against the other spouse to equalize it. So um that's the regime of equalization, and that's how we kind of have to like look at debt and assets and think of it like a ledger, an accounting ledger, so that you can determine who owes what, when it was incurred. Those things are important to determine when you're sorting everything out. And the types of debt that you owe are like your mortgage, your credit card, your car loans, line of credit, um, student loans, any money that you owe to the CRA. That's important to determine who owes what and how much that is. So I think that's a good place to start, Joe. Um, I have the
Yeah,
other topic, so I can keep going.
no, I think I'll let you take a brief pause, maybe a glass of water if you have it. I think you gave a pretty good intro to equalization. I think that's when we're dealing with debt or property in general, the place to start is dealing with net family property. Once we have the net family property taken into account, then we move to the equalization, and then really the equalization, as you said, is the accumulation of the debts and assets from the marriage, right? From date of marriage, date of separation, and it's a tiring experience, but I think you explained it extremely well.
Thanks,
And
Joe.
with on no problem. On that note, you want to maybe get into because you did talk about sole and joint debts. So do you
Yeah.
want to maybe speak to that and maybe how each of those two separate types of debt has an implication on the NFP?
Yeah, for sure. So, while equalization kind of focuses on the collective picture, the financial picture of the a partnership, it's necessary to determine responsibility for specific debts. So whether that's shared or individually incurred debt, in order to calculate each spouse's net family property. So individual debts would be, as I mentioned before, like if you have a credit card that's solely in your name. And that's even if you allow your spouse to use it for purchases, that still would be considered yours because it's in your name. You signed the contract with the bank and whatever. So that's your debt. A joint debt would be like debts that you and your spouse jointly enter. This could be a debt that could have existed prior to the date of marriage or the date of separation. So like if you guys had mortgages that you signed together, it just matters that you signed it together. That would be a joint debt. So then you guys would be equally responsible for the debt, whereas an individual debt, it's all you're liable for all of it. So so like, yeah, if your spouse is listed on the mortgage or a line of credit, it's a joint debt, which a creditor can demand repayment from either party. So then your debt is shared equally and it's reflected as such on your NFP, in each spouse's NFP. So if a debt, let's say for example, a debt exists at the date of marriage, but it no longer exists at date of separation, um your net worth would be increased by at least that amount that kind of disappeared during the marriage, right? So it's important to keep track of your debt, to know because it has a direct impact on what your net worth at the end of the separation, at the end of the relationship at date of separation will be. So building on that, I guess I could turn it over to look at more practical methods of guiding principles for dividing debt between parties, focusing on effective managing of joint accounts and navigating challenges like debt collection. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jodeen. I mean, a lot of I'm gonna sort of reiterate a little bit what you said because I think it is extremely important, and I think it sort of provides the roadmap for ways in which this debt can be allocated. Again, as Jodeen mentioned, with respects to equalization of net family property, the Family Law Act, that's the principal guiding legislation that we use in Ontario for purposes of determining the division of property. And that deals with, again, the division of property as well as debts in Ontario. As Joni mentioned, each spouse calculates their net family property again by subtracting their total debts and liabilities from their total assets as of the date of separation. And it's really important, again, like in terms of valuing net family property. Actually, a colleague who's been on the show a couple times, I really like the way she explains it to clients. And the net family property is almost those two goalposts. On one hand, you have the date of marriage, and on the other goalpost or other hand, you have data separation. Everything in between is counted for. Everything outside of that, so pre-date of marriage, and then post separation, those are not counted for the purposes of determining net family property. So I think that's a really cool way of explaining it, and I think it makes a lot clearer for clients. And in terms of the equalization payment, the spouse with the higher net family property pays a certain or X amount to the other party to ensure a fair division of the financial gains made during the marriage. So with respects to debt allocation principles, I'm going to again touch on what Jodeen said. I'm just going to expand upon it a little bit. So she mentioned the idea of joint debts. So debts that are held jointly, such as a joint credit card or a joint line of credit or even a mortgage, are considered shared obligations, and thus both parties are equally responsible regardless of who incurred the debt. This also goes for carrying costs with respects, for example, mortgages. If both parties are on title, both parties are responsible and equally responsible for the carrying costs of the home as they relate to, for example, mortgage, property tax, property insurance. Those are the big three that I like to use. As well as Jodine mentioned, there's individual debts for family purposes, debts in one spouse's name if they are incurred for the benefit of the family, for example, home improvements or child-related expenses. Those still may be divided between both parties. Again, it doesn't really necessarily matter who it's divided between because at the end of the day, that debt is going to be jointly shared between the parties, whether it's reflected as half and half or held on one person's debt, it's still going to be split at the end of the day. And then we have the personal debts. So these are debts that are incurred before the marriage or after separation. And again, those are typically excluded from the NFP calculations unless they directly benefited the family during the marriage. It's really important to consider. And with respects to the impact on equalization payment and how those debts have that impact, equalization, as I said previously, ensures fairness in the division of both assets as well as liabilities. So that means if one spouse has significantly more debt, it can actually reduce the amount of equalization payment owed to the other. So that's why it's very important to keep track of the debts that you've accumulated as a result of the marriage, as that we want to make sure that you are not solely responsible for those debts and that those debts are being equally shared with the other party. As always, we're in law, so there's always exceptions and considerations to anything we discuss. There are certain debts that how I like to categorize them as non-family purpose debts, and that's actually found in Section 4 of the Family Law Act, and that deals with debts that are incurred for non-marital purposes. What does that mean? Gambling, luxury purchases, personal hobbies, and then those things can actually sometimes be excluded from shared liability if it's proved that they were recklessly incurred. There's a list of certain exclusions as they relates to debts as they apply, and oftentimes there are debts that are incurred either recklessly or maybe the depletion of assets that are not in the best interest of the family, and those will be taken in consideration when determining what debts, if they were jointly maybe incurred, maybe that would result into one party solely dealing with that debt themselves and having not being split with the other party given their recklessness. And sometimes too, we also deal with the disparity in income. Sometimes courts do consider each spouse's ability to repay debts when determining a fair division. So maybe one party incurred significant amount of debt, just given the circumstances of the family situation at the time. And maybe post separation, their income is not allowing them to actually extinguish that debt on their own. So in some cases, the courts will jump in pursuit of equity and fairness. Um, with respects to actually dealing with the methods and principles themselves of dividing these debts, there's a couple ways we take we take that into consideration and sort of um, moving forward. The first being is the most common is separation agreements, right? So spouses can negotiate their own terms for dividing debts through a separation agreement, and often that's with the help of lawyers or mediators. This allows people to be creative in how the debts are divided and how they are purchased, as well as, for example, spousal buyout is a really great and common one that we see, and that's implemented through separation agreements. But we also sometimes have to go to court, and court intervention is necessary. And then that's if parties cannot agree. And the court will decide on the division of debts, considering fairness as well as the specific circumstances of the case. So there's the sort of the two parameters that we go to. Obviously, court's not the only option. There's mediation, there's arbitration, there's collaborative practice. But in terms of the two main methods, we really see the idea of separation agreements, so negotiations using an alternative dispute resolution method, whether that be just mediation between the lawyers themselves, or sorry, I should say negotiation, excuse me, negotiation between the two lawyers themselves, sometimes with the help of a mediator, sometimes not. It depends on the situation. And then we have the adversarial or the litigation path, where sometimes we have to go if parties cannot agree on the division of debts. And that's really all I have for methods and principles. Does anyone want to say a couple words before we move on to effective management?
I
No,
think
I think
you got it covered. You and
yeah,
Jodeen, you're all experts here now. You got everything there.
no, for sure.
Well,
Um,
let's not go too far.
No, listen, there's a lot of moving parts and there's always so much to cover. And we always say that in an hour, a lot of each one of these topics that we cover, it can be a full hour, right? So I
Oh yeah,
mean, we're covering the sort of the basics. That's what we're doing. And we're trying to
hmm
plug in as much information as we can to our viewers. I mean, I know there's a lot, and sometimes it is overwhelming. That's why, we're lawyers, we're here to help. And it's always really important that if you find yourself in this situation, that you seek expert legal advice.
for sure. Yeah.
So moving on now to the idea of effective management. So obviously, we've dealt with, or at least Jodeen and I have spoken about joint accounts, right? And navigating any debt collection. Shanza, can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Of course. Like you and Jodeen kind of like really provided a great overview of, how your rights under the separation are affected by debts, right? How the NFP is affected, how, what debts can be excluded, or how it affects your entitlement. So that's one part of understanding, debts during separation. But another important part, like Zoe just came to me for effective management, is how to manage these debts as you are going through the separation. So let's talk about two things. Let's talk about joint accounts and let's talk about joint debt. So a lot of couples have joint accounts, so very common. And when you separate, the question becomes how to manage the joint account. Some people, they will keep the account open for a short time and they'll do it to cover the joint expenses, like household or child expenses, especially if you continue to live together. And you know, in legal terms, we refer to something called status quo, which is essentially that couples are expected to kind of continue to maintain how bills and other expenses, like childcare expenses specifically, how you continue to maintain how these expenses were paid for prior to separation. So for that reason, a lot of times people will temporarily keep these joint accounts. But eventually, these accounts will have to be closed. You will be equalizing the funds in these accounts, as Joe and Jodeen kind of explained, up until the date of separation. And these accounts, if they're jointly owned, they're listed under both parties' names because they're a joint asset. And so as people separate and as they move on, perhaps one partner is going to move out. So you want to move towards closing these accounts. You want to make sure if there are, for example, any, as you go towards closing these accounts, you want to make sure if there's any pre-authorized payments coming out from these accounts. You want to make sure those are directed to your individual accounts. And in terms of another aspect of it is, both spouses have access to these joint accounts, and sometimes conflict between the parties. That's another reason you want to close them sooner than later, because as a joint account, both spouses have access to these funds. And sometimes we'll see situations where one person will take the funds out, even though it's a joint asset, and you both have equal rights to these funds. And that just complicates the process for people. And so for high conflict situations, I would suggest perhaps, communicate with your financial institution, notify your bank of the separation, and make sure you are informed on any account activity and liabilities that you could be incurring on these joint accounts. And you want to keep a record of all the joint account transactions during the separation period to prevent any disputes over withdrawals, who took out what, who made what payments. You want to have this record for any post-separation specifically. So you know exactly what the movement was on these accounts. So you can properly account for any post-separation adjustments. Now, for managing joint debt, if joint debts remain unpaid, creditors can pursue either spouse for repayment, regardless of who incurred the debt. And regardless of how the debt is accounted jointly 50-50 in your NFPs, for repayment, you are liable for the entire debt, and the creditors can come after you. So what you want to do, if possible, negotiate a repayment plan or settlement with creditors. Ensure that both spouses agree to the terms of how these debts will be paid off, and ensure you're both kind of, have it written down in your separation agreement. Ensure that you're both kind of working towards paying off these debts. Right? So outline which spouse is responsible for specific debts in the separation agreement. While this won't completely absolve you of your liability with the creditors, but it provides a legal framework for enforcement between the spouses if in the event one spouse, for example, defaults. If the debt is substantial, maybe consolidate into a single loan under one spouse's name. That could simplify the repayment process. But of course, this will require trust and cooperation between both spouses. So these are some things to think about. These are hard conversations and not the easiest part of separation. You want to protect yourself. So you want to either pay off these debts or you want to get your name off them.
No, for sure. And I think sometimes people feel like, or at least I've seen it in reality where maybe one party has been paying, for example, the carrying cost of the home post separation, and the other parties, and they're saying, "Well, Joseph, I'm paying the mortgage solely, I'm paying the property taxes solely, like this isn't fair." Take a deep breath, exhale. Like nothing is set in stone. Yes, you're making these payments now by yourself, but as Shanza mentioned, there is the post-separation adjustments that we do take into consideration when drafting each party's net family property. So yes, you may be on the hook for those now, but it's not like the money's going to be gone out of your life forever. You are going to receive half that value back, and that's especially the case if, for example, if it is a mortgage, both parties are on title of the home and both parties are on title of the charge. You're going to receive your half back through the equalization process.
Yeah.
So moving
Uh,
forward now to
oh,
oh,
sorry,
sorry, Jodeen.
Joe.
Go ahead. No, go ahead,
Oh,
go ahead.
yeah. I just wanted to just reiterate a point that Shanza made about just alerting your creditors of your separation, especially if like you have a line of credit and you're both on it jointly, that could just keep racking up if your former partner still has access to it. So it's important that your creditors are made aware that you're going through the separation so that they don't dip into those funds and leave you in the lurch at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes there's not much that the creditors can do because both parties are entitled to that debt. They both have an obligation to pay that debt back. But I mean, definitely what you're saying is 100% true. And if there is acts in which one party unilaterally makes to incur greater debt, that's definitely something that's raised as for example negotiations, or if we have to move aside from negotiations and deal with in the court aspect through litigation.
Yeah.
That's something that we would definitely address.
Oh, yeah. You just want to be able to keep track of everything and just ensure that you've been on top of things so you know who's spending what and if you were privy to, these spending or spending.
100%. And that's why
Mhm.
a lot of these, a lot of, especially for the lines of credit, they actually detail because each party might get their own card. So
Mhm.
the numbers don't lie. Numbers never lie, which is really great about numbers. You know exactly who's taken out of the line of credit, so it's easily traceable. For sure. You're
Mhm.
right. With respects to handling joint loans and mortgages, now that we're talking about loans and mortgages after separation, Shanza spoke to it a bit. Again, I'm just gonna go into a little bit more of a nosedive in terms of the more intricate aspects of it. So dealing with continued joint liability, as Jodeen mentioned, um, that's exactly what they are. They are joint liability, means both parties are liable for these debts. And joint debts, for example, such as loans, lines of credits, mortgages, remain the responsibility, excuse me, of both parties unless otherwise discharged by the creditor. That's really, really important. If your name is on a charge or a loan or anything of that nature, you are responsible for it. All right. And that's, like I said, until it's been discharged by the creditor. Very, very important. And even if one party agrees to assume the debt in a separation agreement, the lender can, as Jodeen said, the lender can still pursue either or both parties for repayment because you've signed a contract that you are going to be liable, right? So that's really important. So, what are options for handling mortgages? We often have times where people come and say, "Hey, there's two parties. We're both on title. We're both on the charge. What do we do?" Right? So, obviously, the easy answer is to sell the home. Right? The most common solution is to sell the home. You pay off the mortgage and you divide the remaining equity between the two of you. Right? This option provides a clean financial break. And sometimes it can even help settle joint obligations, such as a matrimonial home. Sometimes there's a line of credit associated or tied into the home, right? So that's the cleanest break. That's usually the simplest way that we can alleviate the mortgage. Another option, which is not able to be court enforced, a judge cannot order it, but it's what we do outside of court. That's the beauty of separation agreements and negotiating outside of court is that, like I said earlier, we can be creative in solutions. So one of those creative solutions is actually one party buys the other out. And if one party actually wishes to retain the home, they may buy out the other's equity and assume the mortgage themselves. And sometimes we do run into issues with this, but that typically requires the refinancing of the mortgage, which just makes sense. But in that case, you're not refinancing the mortgage in both parties' names. You're only refinancing the mortgage in the sole name of the remaining, or sorry, I should say the retaining party. And that obviously has to be subject to approval by the lender and based on income and credit worthiness, right? So sometimes we come to an issue where party A or spouse A wants to buy out spouse B of the matrimonial home, but maybe they don't have the income to be able to refinance the mortgage, right? So sometimes, even though one party does want to buy the other person out, oftentimes the only solution is to sell the home because the other party cannot qualify for a mortgage on their own. And then the third category, which is usually very it's not normally the common course, but we do see it, is what's called temporary co-ownership. And in some cases, spouses actually agree to jointly retain ownership of the home, and that's for a defined period of time. For example, children finish high school or the real estate market improves. There's various ways in which temporary co-ownership can arise. But during this period, they agree to share the responsibility for the mortgage and other related expenses. So again, parties can be separated. Normally, the terms is living separate and apart, but we do often have times where, because financial struggles, it's very expensive to sometimes for one person to move out, or maybe they can't. That they still have to remain under the same roof, and we call that living separate and apart under the same roof. So, during this period, or even post-separation, parties have a separation agreement played out. Parties will still reside in the same home together. They'll be separated pending divorce, but they will still live together. In that case, temporary co-ownership arises where they have an agreement in place that they're both going to share the carrying costs of the home, and as well, because they're going to be both living in the home, they'll be sharing the utilities as well. And that's for, like I said, a defined period of time. So that we do see that sometimes, but more often than not, it's the sale of the home that results in the discharge of the charge. Going back to the idea of refinancing. So refinancing again allows one spouse to take sole responsibility for the mortgage and possibly at the same time, as Jodeen mentioned, you can consolidate other debts as well. And that's usually a line of credit that may be attached to the home. And lenders obviously will require evidence of the individual's ability to service the loan independently. Again, so that makes that making sure that they have the income to support themselves, so that they're gonna be able to make the monthly payments, however it is, whether that's through an A lender, B lender, C lender, whatever option you do choose, because more often than not, sometimes with a certain income threshold, you may not qualify with an A lender, you may have to go to a B lender. That's fine. But the idea is that you have the sole ability, excuse me, to be able to service the loan. That's the whole idea. Um, Handling joint loans, for example, they can be car loans, lines of credits, credit cards. At first, we deal with it in the negotiation sphere, right? So spouses and sometimes can agree on who will take the responsibility on for specific joint debts. For example, spouse A is like, you know what, I'll deal with the monthly car loan for the Buick Enclave, where you're dealing with the line of credit, right? Because they might be similar in amounts. So that's definitely a possibility. Sometimes again, the idea of refinancing or transfers may come into the equation. The lender may require the loan to be refinanced solely in the responsible party's name if that does happen. If refinancing isn't possible, both parties again are liable. So that's why when we're dealing with financial matters and a separation agreement arises, as soon as I see that one party is paying for or both spouses are on title, for example, for a car, and both parties are responsible for the loan, and only one person they come to an agreement between themselves. No, no, don't worry, I'll take care of the monthly car payments. You always want to make sure that you're getting that other party to refinance the loan. You do not want to be associated with the loan if you're not going to be responsible for it. Because again, as we've come back to it, as per the original agreement, if your name is on that liability, you are responsible for that liability. So it's really important that you get the other party to refinance whatever dealings they're dealing with. With respects to payment responsibilities, this can be done either through a separation agreement or court order, as I've talked about. Separation agreements or court orders, regardless of the two, specify which party is responsible for ongoing payments of joint loans and mortgages. And courts, as a result, may actually order the sale of a property, or they'll actually go in and do the division of debts themselves if parties cannot agree. The courts have the power to order the sale of a property, right? That's really important to consider. With respects to the impact on credit. So dealing with joint credit risks, right? Missed payments on joint debts, that could be again mortgages, affect both parties' credit scores, even if one person is no longer residing in the home, right? So ensuring that payments are made on time is critical to avoid future financial complications. And that also deals with the idea of a mortgage payment. You have to make sure that you're not defaulting, right? Because as soon as you default, that's when you get into hot water. And with respects to debt management solutions, I know Shanza spoke about it, but some couples may explore options such as debt consolidation or credit counseling to be able to manage these joint obligations effectively, at least until a separation agreement can be put in place, or if you're in the litigation route, you receive a court order. As always, parties are really encouraged to seek legal and financial advice that to be able to actually understand their rights, their obligations, and potential risks when they're themselves dividing joint assets and debts. And as always, professional guidance allows that decisions are made in an informed manner, as well as the agreements that parties come to are enforceable. So that's my spiel on joint loans. How did I
Have
do?
a drink of water.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I'm good. No, but I know there's a lot of moving parts, but I mean, long story short, if you can take anything from that talk, is that if your name is on the liability, you are
On,
responsible for that
mhm.
liability until it's been discharged by the creditor, and that can
Yeah.
be ideally through refinancing. So now, if Shanza, do you want to speak about, because I did speak about it a bit, but do you want to speak maybe a little bit further about the importance of the credit score protection and steps that parties that they can take to maintain their credit health?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, let's talk more about protecting your credit score, it's important to stay on top of it. Your credit score isn't just a number, it affects everything. After separation, if you want to rent a place to live, buy a house, or even like landing a job in some cases, it matters. So keeping it in good shape is crucial, especially when you're going through a separation and you're dealing with joint debts, which is why I tell my clients, stay on top of your debts. I know you don't want to pay them, but pay them. So, first things first, keep an eye out on your credit. The easiest way to protect your credit is to know what's happening with it. Check your credit report. You can get it for free, I think, from Equifax or TransUnion. Um, Look for any mistakes or accounts that happened with me actually. So, take a look at your credit report. If you have joint accounts, make sure, everything is on there. If you spot something is off, deal with it right away. Again, deal with those joint accounts. If you and your ex have joint credit cards, loans, shared bank accounts, close or freeze them if you can as soon as possible. Why? Because if they rack up the debt, it's still your problem. And if you can't close it immediately, at least maybe freeze it so no one can maybe, um, have any more transactions on those accounts. If that's a possibility, maybe check with your institutions. And make sure you both agree in the separation agreement, have lawyers involved if you need that. Make sure you agree on how to handle those debts going forward. Don't just assume it'll work out. Do your part as well in making sure that you're staying on top of those payments. Um, I said this earlier as well. Redirect your payments. So, um, get automatic payments set up for bills, loan subscriptions. If you have that coming from any joint account, make sure they are now coming from your personal account. Sometimes this can get lost in the separation as you're dealing with other issues. You might not realize that you had some payments coming out from certain accounts, perhaps those that you shared with your ex, and now, maybe you're closing those accounts. So make sure that there aren't any missed payments as you are kind of dealing with managing all these accounts. This can drag your score down. Um, Plus, being on top of it will kind of keep you more in control over what's being paid and when. Um, like I said, joint debts don't just disappear. So, make sure you're dealing with them. Um, Maybe refinance them in one person's name if that's something you two can agree on. If that's not an option, make sure the payments are on time, even if it means, working together with them temporarily, even if it means you might be the spouse who might be paying more. I know it may suck, but there are post-separation adjustments. Joe talked about that as well. There are ways to account for who made what payment, and hopefully, we are able to kind of recoup that for you as your lawyers, right? So, it's not the end of the world. Um, and start building your own credit. Now's a good time. After your separation, it's a good time to start building or strengthening your own credit history. If you don't have, personal credit card account, make sure, you have those. Maybe take a small loan in your name, pay everything on time, and you can build yourself, your own credit that way. If you are struggling to make payments, don't just ignore it. So, maybe call your creditors, explain to them that you're going through a separation, explain your situation. Sometimes they might be able to offer you some temporary solution, like maybe lowering your payments, or sometimes they give you more time. It's better to try to work something out than to have a missed payment. So if you are struggling with your payments, try contacting your creditors. Maybe, you don't know, maybe there is something they can kind of do to take that pressure off of you. And like I said, don't be afraid to get help if things feel overwhelming. Talk to a financial advisor. They can help you kind of figure out a game plan to manage your debt and keep your credit score intact. And yeah, speak to someone if you're struggling with that. And there are professionals available, and maybe talk to your bank. And just stay on top of it. Just don't ignore it. Those are some
Yeah.
tips for me.
No, for sure. 100% right. Bang on. While you're giving tips, um, any strategies while you're on the roll here? Any strategies for long-term debt management, maybe? and I guess moving towards financial stability post-separation?
Yeah, in terms of building financial stability, like I said, it's all about being proactive and being consistent, right? Especially if you're navigating life after a separation and you're looking to improve your financial health. Looking to manage your finances differently now that your spouse is no longer in the picture. Having a plan in place that can, make and break things for you. So, you want to start by taking stock of your finances. You can't manage what you don't know, very similar to what I said before. The first step is understanding exactly where you stand and what you need. So you want to list down all your debts, write down every debt that you have, whether it's credit card, lines of credit, any joint obligations from the relationship, and note the details. Know how much interest you're paying on these debts. Know what are the minimum payments and what are those due dates. This will help you prioritize which debts to tackle first. And then it's all about prioritizing your debts. Now, not all debts are equal. Some will cost you more over time if you don't pay them off quickly. So, maybe, focus on paying off the high interest debts first, like your credit cards, before you move on to your low interest debts, like student loan, for example, or mortgage. There's like these two methods. I think it's called like a snowball method. It's like you pay off your smallest debts first, to build some momentum. Or there's another method that kind of helps you focus on your high interest debts first, so that you can save more money in the long run. Because remember, high interest debts are probably gonna cost you more in interest payments. So, if you can get rid of those faster, even better. So, depending on your situation, pick whether, you want to start with the smaller debts or you want to start with the high interest debts. Um, Step three is to create a budget. A budget is key to managing debt and staying financially stable. Track your income, your expenses, look at how much you are making, where your money's going each month. You might want to cut unnecessary expenses, identify areas where you can reduce your spending, even temporarily, to free up some money for debt repayment. Um, you can do this with the help of your family lawyer to remember when we do the financial statements with our clients, these statements, they list down your income, they list down your expenses, and they're so helpful for some of my clients, especially because they can see exactly how much they're making, where all the money is going. So, if you are going through a separation, if you are working on a financial statement, then, kind of maybe sit down and look at that statement to see where the money is going. And then it's all about, allocating your funds wisely and making sure you're putting some money aside if you can, perhaps for saving in emergencies and for, these debt repayments. And I'll just also say, like, have an emergency fund. Unexpected expenses, they can throw off anyone, no matter how good of a planner you are. So, maybe start small, keep it accessible, have an emergency fund, and it can go anywhere as you might need it. Could even go towards debt management, which is what we are talking about today. And avoid taking on new debt. I think that's a given. So, if you are working off paying off existing debts, try to avoid accumulating new debts. I know sometimes, it can't be helped, but obviously, if possible, try to avoid that. Um, Wait until you're in a more financially stable position before making, large purchases or before, finding yourself in under more debts. And lastly, I'm just going to say, invest in your future. Like, um, financial stability is not just about paying off your debts. It's also about building wealth. So, if you have access to a retirement plan, like an RRSP or TFSA, contribute regularly, even if it's a small amount. If you have savings, invest. If you can invest wisely, consider talking to a financial advisor, to create an investment plan that can align with your long-term goals. Again, I said earlier to seek professional guidance if you are feeling overwhelmed about your next step. Don't hesitate to reach out. Maybe talk to credit counselors, financial advisors. If you are doing collaborative law, as part of your separation, sometimes like we have financial professionals working with the parties, and you can utilize their expertise as well as part of the divorce process. That's another reason we like collaborative law because it's not just about the immediate issues of a separation. Like these experts can really help you put your life together moving forward, what your life is going to look like post-separation, how you're going to manage your finances going forward. So it can be really helpful, kind of like having those experts uh, being there as you kind of go through this big change in your life. Okay. Whew. Anything that I missed, Joe, Jodeen, feel free to kind of like jump in here. But um,
No, I was just gonna say you like you spot on. Like I think a lot of people get wrapped up in the cost associated with the separation, and yes, there is a cost associated. I mean, I forgot. I think it was Jonathan Painter in a previous session we had. There, in terms of stressful events in your life, separation is third and divorce is second, right? First being the passing of an immediate family member. So I mean, it's a stressful time, right? It's you're going from a household where there was two incomes, and now you're going to be shifting to a single household income, right? It's a financial shock, and a lot of people, it's an overwhelming experience. We understand that completely, and we're here to help. That's our goal. We are here to help alleviate those stresses that you're having, as well as putting forward your rights and obligations to you, so it allows you to make, informed decisions with respects to your case moving forward, and we're all here to support you with that. Um, I think that's pretty much a great way to end off today's discussion is through Shanza's points there. Thank you everyone for tuning in today to Family Law Now After Hours. Following the session, a brief survey will appear if you're on Zoom, and that will allow you to share your feedback, comments, suggestions for future topics that you'd like us to explore, as well as how we did today. As always, your feedback is really greatly appreciated. As we said, if you did make it to the end of this session, we are offering a free 20-minute consultation with one of our lawyers um, in order to get, sorry, excuse me, in order to take advantage of that opportunity, please contact our intake team at intake, INTAKE, at russellalexander.com. And in your email, please provide the code Leafs, as always. LEAFS, and that will allow you to schedule your appointment for the free complimentary consultation. It is Tuesday night. That email has to be in by by Friday at noon in order to be eligible to redeem that initial consultation, complimentary consultation. So please email our intake team at intake@russellalexander.com and provide the code LEAFS, LEAFS, to schedule your appointment. Registration is also open for our next event. All you have to do is go to russellalexander.com/family law now. Sorry, family law now. Sorry, it's been a long day. Tuesday's been a long day today. As always, thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your insights. And as always, thank you, the viewer, for tuning in to Family Law Now After Hours. We love putting this on for you guys, and we hope that you learned a lot today. Thank you and all, and have a great night.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Joe.
everyone. Thanks,
Thanks,
Joe.
guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Dean.
Shanza. Bye.